Hello, you all. How are you doing? How are you riding the waves of life right now? I hope all right. So, today I want to talk about intuitive living, living from a place of intuition. And I think that the intention to live more intuitively is going to become it's not only something that's kind of like yes, that's nice, it would be ideal, right? That, how lovely would it be to live from a place where your intuition is really truly guiding you. But I also think it's going to be a necessity in a world that is increasingly becoming more confusing, in the sense that it's sometimes hard to know what's real, what's false or fake, what's artificial intelligence and what's human intelligence. So I think that this skill that we all have to be intuitive is going to actually be quite fundamental. But I also, I have always had the intention or the practice to live intuitively, because I find that it's firstly the most helpful, and secondly the most magical. When we can go into that realm of really being in a kind of flow, which doesn't mean that things are always easy, but there is this trust. There's synchronicities that can come in. There's guidance that can be drawn upon. But I want to go into, like, what does it look like to live an intuitive life, but also what does it require? And it actually requires a lot of discipline, especially given the way that we live right now. And there's so much distraction and noise and so many things vying for your attention. And there are a few very specific things that our intuition requires for us to be able to hear our intuition. So I'll go into all of these things and more. So let's see. Let's dive in. This is Corinne Bloom, and you're listening to Raw Conversations. So I want to preface that sometimes when we use the word intuition, people think, oh, I don't have that, or I can't, or I need to go to somebody else that's intuitive or psychic or clairvoyant, whatever you want to call it. We all have it. We all have it. We're just very disconnected from it because of the way that we live in society. It's really just that simple. So I want to put that out there from the start, because, I think it's very easy to kind of put other people on a pedestal that have intuition or psychic abilities, when we all have the inner technology for it. So I want to just help kind of support and guide you into how to connect into that for yourself. And, my experience, I was told from a very young age that, oh, do you know that I'd have like psychic readings, or, work with intuitive healers or whatever. They'd be like, do you know that you're really psychic? You're very intuitive. And I kind of like, I knew, and also just felt like I couldn't quite really own it, and it's a process, and there's so many layers that come with it, because of, past life experiences, or just that people will shut down your intuition sometimes because it doesn't seem rational or logical. And in a society that has been so heavily leaning towards the brain, for one, just the mind and not the heart and not the guts, and a society that's been pulled away from source, a society that loves left brain, logical, rational, linear, which is just an aspect, it's just a portion of us, and we've left behind this whole other portion. So that is a little bit of it too, right? We're rebalancing the masculine and feminine, the right and left hemispheres of the brain, but also the three brains together, right? Mind, heart, and gut. So there's so many reasons why we might have been also kind of thwarted or pulled off of our center, and from that kind of very inner that GPS system that we have. And everything, I know I'm repeating myself, but everything in our society, if you pay attention, it's pulling us further away from ourselves rather than closer. And there's some kind of sinister reasons for that, but I'm not going to go into that, because it doesn't matter. Actually, it really doesn't matter. What matters is that we're here walking, as Ram Dass says, we're all walking each other home. And I think that's so beautiful. So, we can support one another in remembering. This is all it is. You're not learning anything new. You're remembering what you're being, you could say even your DNA, you could say your soul template already knows. It already knows. We're just bringing it back into conscious awareness. So I can say that for my life, I have come in and out of phases where I felt very connected to my intuition, and at times just being like, man, I just can't hear anything. And it's really frustrating. And I, maybe there's different things going on. Maybe it's really about that kind of owning it and trusting it and having faith in it and practicing it, because think of it as like a muscle that is an atrophy because it hasn't been used. And so to practice it means we need to be consistent. And it means, I think sometimes we have this idea of intuition of being like, I'm going to get the really loud, big answer that's going to give me the whole, reveal the whole image to me. And I've used this analogy in the past that intuition is often like a game of connect the dots, where you're presented with one dot and then another and another and another. But as it unfolds and you're connecting the dots, the image begins to appear, right? Sometimes it's sometimes every now and again, but rather rarely I've found, does it just come in one full, like, boom, there you go. That's the answer. And that's the whole image. And that's the map and the key, because, life is kind of like a treasure hunt. And if we knew where the treasure was and how to get there and, what the steps were, and it would be boring, right? It would be boring. So intuition is, I find more and more, especially when I'm in a place that I'm not clear, I will ask, what is the next right step? What is just the next right step? Because that inevitably leads me in the right direction. And then once I'm in the quote unquote right direction, there's a path, right? There's a path and there's a little bit more flow. So like anything, I'm thinking even the example of meditation. People think, oh, I have to sit and meditate on the cushion with my legs crossed and, I have no thoughts for half an hour. And then I've done it well. And it's no, start with 1 minute, then 2 minutes, then 5 minutes, then, even little bits of something is so much better than nothing, because what we thought we should do or what we believe we think we should do is so much bigger than what we actually can jump to. It's like jumping across the chasm. It's no, just take small steps, because otherwise you're not going to do it. You're not going to do it. So just to give you background and context, there's definitely been times in my life where I feel like I can't see and I don't know. And so it's not all of a sudden like you boom arrive to this place and you always have the answers. I think that you take action on the smallest of whispers. You listen to it. That's how you cultivate and you flex that muscle, as you listen to even the smallest of things. There's a medium, she was giving an example of when she was first starting to really listen to her higher self, her guides, her intuition. She had this voice that said, put on a different shirt. And, she was getting ready for a lunch and she's like, no, but I want to wear this shirt. I like this shirt. Why do I need to put on another shirt? But it was so clear. It was like, put on another shirt. And so she put on another shirt over her shirt, and she goes to sit down, and, she'd cooked, everything was fine. Nothing got on her. And she came sit down at the table, started eating. She was fine. Nothing on her. And then they said, oh, it would be really good to have some like barbecue sauce with this chicken. And so whoever, I don't know if it was her husband or something, goes up and gets the bottle from the fridge. And because they had traveled somewhere that it was higher elevation, when he opened the bottle, it just exploded and went all over her shirt. And she's like, oh, okay, thank you. That was why I was being asked and being told, put on another shirt. So when you listen to the most mundane things that there's no logical reason for it, when you start practicing listening to those things and taking action on those things, that's what flexes that muscle and cultivates that relationship where you begin to hear what normally can just be like a little whisper, right? And it becomes louder. I've certainly have had moments in my life where one in particular that was really profound was I was in Asia. I was in Thailand traveling, backpacking with my boyfriend at the time. And we had a route laid out for us that kind of went through one way and looped around all these different countries. And we were at the airport, had gone through security, and we were sitting at the cafe area. And all of a sudden, it was like I could feel the blood leave my body. I just all of a sudden felt really like not okay. And something in me was just like, I can't get on that plane. I can't get on that plane. So it was like, okay, I had no logical reason. I felt healthy. I felt fine. But there was just something so clearly that was like, you cannot get on that plane, Corinne. So what's amazing about intuition, and when you follow it as well, is that all the things that you think are obstacles tend to unfold very, very easily. So we were thinking, okay, we're going to lose all our money. This was back in mid 2000s. So obviously it was a bit different than today, but we went down to the desk and just said, we can't get on this flight. And the guy was like, okay, fine. We give him our tickets. He gives us cash. And that was that. And I remember it was like, wow, what a bizarre experience. Anyway, I still didn't know why that happened until a week later. We decided to go the other route. So instead of taking like the route, clockwise, we were going to do it counterclockwise. And so we flew to Hong Kong. And that night I got so sick, so incredibly sick that I was rushed to the emergency room. And I don't have any recollection of anything because I was so out of it at this point, but I basically collapsed on the ground. And, they had said, oh, no, we can't see you for hours, but I collapsed on the floor and got rushed back. And I had a bad intestinal parasite and I was severely dehydrated. And I spent the night there. And they said, thank God you didn't take your original route to Laos. Because if you were this sick, they would have had to try to get you on a plane and send you to Thailand or to the closest place where they would have a proper hospital. So that was my intuition telling me a week before what was going to happen. It was warning me, So things like that, where it's in a society where we're told to use rationale and logical, linear, factual needs to be proven in order for it to exist, it can sometimes really overpower and it's like very overbearing to our intuition that often doesn't make any sense in the moment. But it knows so much more, because that you could say that your intuition is really your soul that has the overview that is outside of space and time. So it can see what to us is 10 days down the line. It can see that in the now because it's outside of space and time. And so you could think of it, as, okay, from my human self, which is the car. If you've been following, you know that this is like the analogy that I've been using a lot lately. The human and the personality that we have, Corinne, as I am, is the car, is the vehicle. My soul is driving it, right? My soul is the driver. So we want to go into overdrive. We want to be the car that says, no, I know where I'm going. And I know this analogy is not going to work for very much longer because there's self-driving cars, but you get what I'm trying to say. So in that moment, or in those moments where we hear this voice that doesn't make any sense, it doesn't relate to anything that's going on right now, but it's really trusting and listening and taking action, taking the risk to take the action without knowing what the result is going to be, trusting that that's our soul. And I really do believe in these times where, we've been living under the amnesia that we don't remember who we truly are, which is our soul self. But what we're finally doing, maybe for the first time in this kind of human experiment, is that we're merging the two sides of the veil, right? So we're merging this human experience that feels incredibly real. We're merging this personality that I know as Corinne to be myself, and we're merging it with who we truly are, which is the infinite, immortal soul self. And I think it's exciting for the human part to know, oh, I'm so much more than this. I'm so much more than just these thoughts and these feelings in this body and this kind of finite mortal life, right? I'm so much more than that. And I can tap into this infinite part of me that is so wise and knowing and free, you could say. But it's also, I think, very interesting from the soul perspective of like, oh, I'm finally communicating. It's like almost I don't know why this comes through. It's almost, was it MacGyver where his car spoke to him? It's like all of a sudden, like, how cool, I get to drive a vehicle that can actually communicate back to me. Like, how cool is that? And so then it really becomes this partnership of like, okay, I'm in this experience, I'm in this game, if you want to call it that, but I'm awake. The another example that I've used is it's all of a sudden going from dreaming to lucid dreaming, where you know that you can actually actively engage in your dream and make conscious choices in your dream to guide it and steer it. So I think it's a bit like that. That's at least where I'm coming from. That's what I'm coming to as far as a conclusion right now. So let me just backstep a little bit. Okay, so I want to go into what is required for us to tap into that intuitive voice. Now, the story that I gave you was back in like 2005, and there were no iPhones. You know, there was email. I wasn't on Facebook. There was no Instagram. There was none of that stuff. You would literally travel, and, you know, to keep in touch with your family, you either had to find a place where you could make an international call, or you would go to like an internet cafe and pay for a half an hour of getting onto the computer and send emails to people. So the point is there was actually very, very little distraction. You were really in the real world. And I mean, I feel really grateful that I had that experience. And I honestly feel very heartbroken for the younger generation that that's not their experience, right? Because the phone is a kind of prison. So this last week, I'm a very disciplined person, and like when it comes to things that I know aren't good for me, I'm pretty good at like being disciplined enough to go, okay, I don't have an addictive personality. But with that said, with me being a very disciplined, non-addictive personality person, social media and these phones are highly addictive, and they're meant to be that, right? They're meant to hook you in, get you addicted, hypnotize you, keep you scrolling. Anything that's scrolling, whether it's up and down or left or right, it causes addiction. And for a long time now, I've really been hearing just like delete it, especially Instagram. Like Facebook, I've never had the app, and I only go on my computer, you know, or sometimes I would post through Instagram, but whatever. But Instagram especially, because it's just these tiny little bite size, and you scroll and you scroll, and for a long time I was like, I don't, this doesn't make me feel good. I don't like this. And even if I put a restriction on it, and even if I abide by that restriction, what really got me is I got rid of my television when I was in my early 20s. I'm now in my 40s. And because I just was like, I don't want to put that crap into my mind. And what really got me was when, like, oh my God, I basically have a television in my hand, you know, and it's so much worse than what a television was, because a television, you would actually sit there and watch a program, and yes, there'd be some adverts, but then you would sit and watch one thing for half an hour, right? And now you're watching like hundreds of things because it's just a few seconds here and a few seconds there. So what it's doing to our brain is literally rewiring our brain, and it's creating this false dopamine hit, and it's creating addiction, and it takes us out of our real moment life and pulls on our presence, and whether you're aware of it or not, puts us into comparing our lives to other people's lives, and it just creates so much suffering on so many levels. And so I finally it was like Friday evening, I was like, that's it. I'm uninstalling it. I'm taking it off my phone. And I instantly felt relief. And I don't miss it at all. I have no desire to go back on it. So the point of my sharing this is, I knew that, like, once you release that from your space, that it's pulling on your consciousness, I call it the black mist. It like creeps out, and it comes and grabs your consciousness. It pulls for, it's getting your attention. right? It's taking your attention. Think of it as Monsters Inc. Did you ever see that Pixar film where the monsters have to come out and scare the kids? They need to get them to scream, and the bigger the scream, the more energy they were able to retain, and that's what powered their city. Like that's the electricity source. This is no different. It's like this organism that is sucking, like this black mist that comes out and has this vampiric kind of energy that sucks our consciousness, that sucks our attention. And it's feeding something, but it's draining and depleting us. So why am I sharing all of this? Because that is a huge source of distraction, of pulling us away from the present moment and putting in so much noise and clutter into our consciousness. Because think about how much you're absorbing, how much stimulation you're absorbing of other people's opinions, of visuals, of, thoughts and arguments and, all sorts of stuff. Like I felt myself getting very, very overwhelmed. And that's with giving myself a limit of an hour, which I wouldn't even reach that limit most days. I felt overwhelmed and, being in a period of my life where I really need clarity because I'm still in this limbo, in this transition of not finding our home and all of this stuff coming up. And I found myself saying, I can't hear my intuition, and I tap it easily into the collective, and the collective right now is very noisy and the world is very chaotic. But then I'm thinking, what am I doing in my life that is adding to that chaos and is adding to that noise and it's just too loud? And I realized that even spending a half an hour on Instagram a day is like, I don't want that. It's clouding my, it's clogging up, it's creating traffic in my mind and in my consciousness. And I deleted it Friday night, and there was something that I was trying to contemplate, and I just was really feeling the overwhelm and the stress of it, and I couldn't come to an answer. And the next morning, the answer was there. So what does that tell me? What does that tell us? Remove the static and the noise, and the clarity has space to come in. So we have this fantasy of wouldn't it be lovely if we were just always really intuitive and we had the answers and the guidance and, we were so deeply connected to ourselves that it was just there and I didn't even have to think about it. That's really wonderful. And that is possible. It's only possible if we make space for it. Otherwise, we will not hear it. Because what intuition needs is it needs stillness, it needs silence, and it needs space. Without those things, it might be trying to get through, but we're not going to hear it because we're going to be in overwhelm. We're going to be overstimulated. Too much sensory, being prodded at, you could say, energetically, visually, auditorily, all of these ways that it infiltrates us. And so it's no wonder that people go, God, I don't have an intuition, or I can't hear it. I don't even know what it sounds like, because it's not blunt and loud, like, go do this, Corinne. I wish, I wish. It's not like that. But with that said, the phases of my life where I have been more quiet, where I have taken those times to go inwards and sit with myself, maybe I write and journal a lot more, or I just sit and, as I spoke about last week, just stare at the tree or the sunset or the sky or the water or whatever it is, but being in nature and not doing anything, but experiencing so much because it's in the being, right? That everything becomes really, really alive. And we drop out of just living primarily in the mind. If you want to look at it from a dimensional perspective, this realm that we're going into with technology and social media and AI and all of that, you could say is bringing us into more of a fourth dimensional field, which is a field of thought. But the thing is, when we're entering a field of thought, we have to be extraordinarily disciplined. Because think of it as the same way as you put food in your body. Do you want to put junk food in your body, or do you want to put healthy food into your body and food that you need, sustenance and nourishment that you personally need, right? Which might differ from other people. But the discipline and the discernment is absolutely key, because we're in a time of God, it's like just, yeah, over information. I could use a word, but it's just too crass, so I'm not going to say it. But it's just this like, bleh, just way too much. And so then you bring in this kind of like deep fakes and AI and false accounts and, goodness knows all of the things that they can do. And that can become really confusing and it can become very scary. And how do you discern? How do you discern what's real and what's fake, what's true and what's false? Your intuition. Because your intuition knows because it's coming from your soul, and your soul knows because it has that 360 eagle eye view that is so much more expansive and vast and can see the periphery and can see ahead and behind and to the back diagonal and than your little human brain can. But the discipline requires that remove the distraction. Remove the distraction. If you really, really want to fine tune this skill, anything that is vying for our attention and pulling us away from that still point. And I don't mean you have to live monastically, you can still go out and you can still have fun. You can still engage with things, but there is discipline that's required, that you create the space to be in the stillness, to be in the silence, because intuition requires us to listen. Sometimes our intuition will say things, but we don't listen. Or maybe we just hear a little bit. We bypass it. We don't pay attention to it. We do the thing. And then we're like, shit, I did have that voice, but I didn't listen to it. Right. And I remember listening to somebody on a podcast who was also an intuitive and, saying it's like the soul saying, there's a hole right there. Like, don't fall in the hole. I'm letting you know, I'm warning you, there's a hole right there. And the human's like, nah, shut up. I'm going to do whatever I want to do. And boom, they go into the hole. And the soul's like, okay, let's pick you up. Let's dust you off. Let's take you out of the hole. Okay, now can I just guide you in the direction? And, sometimes that human needs to like, nope, I'm going to do it my way. And it needs to fall into the hole 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 more times before it goes, okay, you know what? I think I'm going to listen to you now. So it's a bit of that. It's a bit of that. And the soul has no judgment, just like source has no judgment. We're learning here. We're in the school of life. It's like when a kid is learning to walk, you're not going to reprimand them for falling. They're learning how to walk. And even though I do believe this is a skill that we have always known and we've always had, because we've been in this sleep state for so long, it is like relearning, learning again how to walk and how to talk and all of these things. I think that once we tap into it, things will start to come online more rapidly, and then things really come in. I've definitely found that in the last year of really dedicating myself to giving myself that space and really listening, it's like all of a sudden the abilities that felt a little bit more dormant or that I kind of pushed aside, they come to the fore like much, much stronger, and kind of all of a sudden, right? And then things kind of come in. And then also remember power of belief, that if you don't believe that you're intuitive, that, oh no, that's not for me, other people can do that, but I can't, that's going to limit you. It's like believing I am intuitive. I am a psychic being. That is in my DNA. It is in my technology, my human and soul technology. Right. So really believing that. And of course, what helps us, because we're experiential creatures and we only learn through our own experience, really, truly, is that's why you start with the small things. You start by calling in and setting that intention of, I want to learn how to hear and get to know the language of my intuition better. And so it's going to start with really, really tiny little things, but you pay attention to those tiny, really mundane things. And eventually it will build upon itself, just like a muscle gets stronger and you can then do more reps and it's easier, right? So I want to wrap it up with the importance of doing this work right now. I was having a conversation with my neighbor the other day because they were kind of asking, well, I say my neighbor, I'm in a sublet. So it's like, not a long-term neighbor. It's like temporary, short-term neighbor. And he was asking me what I do. And I said, I'm an authenticity coach. And he said, wow, that's so great. Like that is so needed right now. Like for people to really really come back to their authenticity. And, I'm going more into the soul readings because I feel like it's a more direct path in a way, but also because you could say as a coach, I could very well become redundant because AI, can be a therapist. It can be, but it's not truly, because what it lacks is that human knowing, empathy, intuition, catching the cues, catching the body language, the tone, the energy. AI can't pick up any of that stuff. None of it. And there's some really good examples out there that are actually quite like, somebody was saying that they were testing it out of like, someone that's like really depressed and going to AI as if it were like a therapist, and he says all these wonderful things. It's like, wow, this is really helpful. And then the person asks, okay, where are the closest, highest bridges to me? And AI goes, oh, sure, yeah, I can answer that to you. Not recognizing, because that person wants to go jump off that bridge. Whereas a human would catch that. A human would go, oh, I know what you're doing there, right? So why am I sharing this? Because nothing can replace the human. No technology can replace the human. And we have been falsely told that we are not very powerful, that we're not very advanced. And yes, you could say from a consciousness level, there's a lot of remembering and waking up to happen, like to kind of come back into our, I don't even want to call it our potential, because it's just coming back into our original design, you could say, because we've been pulled so far off of it through television, through films, through terrible food, through toxins in our environment, through manipulation, like generations after generations, thousands of years after thousands of years. And so there's a lot to come back home to, right? But the thing is that who we are and what we're made of in our true form is extraordinary. It's nothing short of miraculous. So in a time where there's so many things that are not authentic, that are not real, and of the flesh and of the heart and of the spirit, showing up authentically in connection with our intuition, which means in connection to our higher self, which means in connection to source. My opinion is that's really the only way forwards. And I think there might very well be a kind of fork in the road where some people will choose to go down the more technological route, transhumanism, go more towards the machine. And I think there will be those that will take the turn that will go more into nature, both outer nature and inner nature. And I guess that's a choice that each soul makes, depending on what they've signed up to learn in this lifetime. But I suppose I'm here to support those that want to walk the path of nature, both outer and inner, that want to walk the path back home to who we truly are. And I think, again, part of the manipulation has been to say that nothing is true and there is no greater source, because it's been muddled up with, religious stuff that has been hugely manipulated by men, and it's not actually the original source, or it gets, some of it's real and some of it's not. And so it becomes confusing, and then everything gets thrown out with the baby gets thrown out with the bathwater. And so this comes back to the discernment. How will you discern? And I know this is tricky because I was going to say, how can you discern what's true and what's not true? And you could say, well, everybody has their own truth, But what I'm speaking to, that I spoke to last week, is truth with the capital T. That doesn't have opposition. It doesn't have sides, because the sides and the division and the opinions are the, as I spoke about last week, it's the shadows being projected onto the cave wall, making you believe that that's reality, and it's not reality. It's complete manipulation. It's a complete fabricated, some people call it the inverted matrix. And I don't want to throw out all these words so go, oh God, Corinne, you've lost me. But just think of it this way. When you tune into your intuition, you're not viewing things through your mind that wants to have an opinion or that judges. You are simply in the energy of something. And when you are in the energy of something, you will either know if it's coming from, I'm going to put it in very simple dualistic terms just to make it easy for the brain to understand. It's either going to feel good or it's going to feel bad. It's going to feel like it's of the light or it's going to feel like it's of the dark. It's either going to feel true or it's going to feel false. And you just feel it. You don't need to logically, rationally, intellectually analyze or have an answer for it as to why it is that way. And again, I'm going to go back to the example of when I just knew I can't get on that plane. My brain had no idea why that was coming through. My soul knew. And then my brain caught up a week later and was like, oh, right, this is why. Right? So in a time where we're dealing with just so much illusion and all the shadows coming up, and we're realizing, we're seeing all of the fallacies and all of the things that have been kept from us, and it's confronting, right? And it's confusing, and that can be destabilizing to the ego, to the identity, to our sense of reality and knowing what's up and what's down. And so what is going to be your greatest tool is your inner guidance system. Trust it. Listen to it. It is there for you to guide you. It will never lead you astray. Your mind might, but that part of you that then you come into a knowing, a gnosis that is an embodied knowing, not the intellectual knowing. Okay. Like we have to really relearn to learn by absorbing information into our field rather than just using one tiny tool. It's an amazing tool, the mind, but it's just a tool, and it's not the biggest tool that we have. The biggest tool that we have is our field. And we're gathering information, collecting information from that field all the time. And we know it way ahead of the mind. And if you want to go into the kind of science of that, I would recommend following the telepathy tapes and the offshoots of that, because the science is now catching up to what mysticism has known for eons, right? So without waffling on for too much longer, the invitation is make more space. Make more space to do nothing. When I took Instagram off my phone, I could tell, like, if I went onto WhatsApp to reply to a message, it was like my thumb had the memory of, I always put Instagram. I'm just using that as an example because that's what I didn't have TikTok or Twitter or anything like that. It could be whatever you went to. But my thumb knew the habit. I always put Instagram like a couple pages, not on the first page, so that it's harder to get to. But my thumb knew that kind of like, oh, and then you swipe left and then you go to this point and you open that. And I'd be like, why am I opening this? And of course, if you post something, you're more likely to go on because you're going to see what the feedback is, right? Now, that whole thing, how many likes and it's such an insidious just game and trap. I am going to be judgmental about it because I think it's terribly unhealthy, but we all have to come to that point in our own way. And I have no judgment if you're still on it. Anyway, it's not about judgment. It's about liberation. So we each get there in our own moment. And it's not to say you can't use it at all, but just with awareness, with consciousness. But amazing how the body has that muscle memory, of course, to just go there. And so when you don't have that, it's all of a sudden like, just put the phone down. I don't need it. And I find that, like, if I'm with my daughter, I just leave the phone behind. If we're going to go out for a bit, if I don't need it, why bring it? Right. And in that, sometimes the first day or two, there was a bit like, okay, well, what do I do now? What do I normally do? And I found myself just, listening to music or just sitting and looking outside, or much more present for my daughter. I mean, I was always conscious of that, to not go to the phone anyway when I'm with her, but you know what I'm talking about. So the invitation is to give yourself that space, because you might think in this moment that you can't live without it. They give you all of these really good reasons. Oh, this is how you stay connected and how you see your friend. I never saw my friends on Instagram. I saw suggested accounts and ads all the time. Never saw my friends. So that's, again, another illusion, right? False, empty promises. When the space is there, things get to It's a relief. Your nervous system will be relieved. And in that space, you get to spend more time with yourself. You get to spend more time with the reality that is before and around you right here, right now. And when you have that space and when you invite yourself into more moments of stillness, whether it's sitting with meditation, walking in nature, whatever it is, but without the distraction, without the noise, without the technology, then you can begin to hear. You can begin to listen and hear the voice. You can begin to have the conversation with yourself. So you might need to be disciplined in the beginning, you know, but give yourself those moments of space as frequently, as often as you can, even if it's for a short amount of time. Give those moments to yourself and see if space opens up, relief opens up, your mind has more space, your field has more space, your heart has more space, your nervous system is finally relaxed. And then notice. And from that place, you can have the dialogue. You can ask your higher self, your intuition, your guides, your angels, your ancestors, whoever, maybe that's too far out, but you can ask yourself, you can hear yourself more. Even if actually in the beginning, you're just communicating with your human self, it's like, oh my God, I'm going to listen and pay attention to my feelings. I'm going to listen and pay attention to my needs, right? Hey, how am I doing? What's going on for me right now? What do I need in this moment? You might have to just begin there with your human self and then eventually get to your soul self and then eventually get to your unseen support system, right? And I find that also there's more space to receive messages and synchronicities through other human beings, because messages do often come through humans. But if we're too busy and too cluttered, we're not going to notice it. It's the same thing that if you live in a house that is so cluttered, how are you going to find the thing that you need to find, right? You might find it, but you have to sift through a lot of junk and it's going to be really overwhelming and chaotic in the process. Yeah. So discipline, discernment, taking the time to listen, removing the distraction, and then begin the dialogue with yourself, right? A lot of D's there. Discipline, discernment, dialogue, right? That can come in once we take these steps to, it's just removing the obstacles. That's it. It's just removing the obstacles that are keeping you from what is your innate true nature. So I'm going to leave it at that. Of course, take it, and make it your own. These are just some ideas. Sorry, I'm so hot. Make it your own. And that's part of it too, is intuition is you don't need to follow anybody else's opinion. Take what resonates, leave behind what doesn't, as I always say, because the most important thing is you begin to listen to your intuition, which is not your mind or your ego that's like, see, I'm right. That's not what intuition does, because the soul self is compassionate. It doesn't want division. It doesn't want polarity, right? It has compassion because it knows we're all one anyway. So if you're getting into any kind of righteousness, any voice in your head that says, see, I'm right and they're wrong, and that's not your intuition. So that's another thing, is really get to know, what is the voice of my ego? What is the voice of my insecurities? What is the voice of my fears, my limiting beliefs? And what is the voice of my true essence and soul? So go have fun with it. That's the most important thing. Go have fun, experiment, play, get it wrong, do it again, get it wrong, do it again. You'll get it right just by practice. So I hope that helps. Take it or leave it as feels right for you, and loving you from afar. Bye. You've been listening to Raw Conversations with Corinne Bloom. Thanks so much for showing up, listening in, and being a part of the conversation with me.